don't go to work. They don't go to work. They don't go to work. They don't get food. They don't go to work. They don't get food. They don't go to work. They don't go to work. They don't go to work. They don't go to work.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to Organizing in the Time of COVID, or as I sometimes say, organizing in the time of chaos. Welcome to the show. My guest today is Timothy Wise, who's author of Eating Tomorrow, Agribusiness, Family Farmers, and the Battle for the Future of Food, published by New Press. Timothy is a senior advisor at the Institute of Agriculture, Trade and Trade Policy, where his work focuses on the future of food, based very much on his recent book. He's had a long collaboration with that institution and does work around dumping U.S. agricultural subsidies and policies, responses to the global food crisis, WTO, Mexico, NAFTA, and he's author of a recent report, Failing Africa's Farmers, an impact assessment of the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. Many people will probably be aware of the Green Revolution that is promoted widely in India. The Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa was founded, in 2006, with the goal of bringing high-yield agricultural practices to 30 million small farmer households. And with the adoption of commercial seeds and inorganic fertilizer, in other words, being an output for the Monsantos and others of this world, AGRAs set out to double crop productivity and incomes while having food security, insecurity eliminated by 2020. Well, to discuss that report, I have very fortunately here, I have Tim Wise joining us here in the studio. Welcome, Tim. Really nice to have you on the show.
Oh, real pleasure to join you.
Yeah, great. So tell us about, maybe a starting point would be to say, tell us something about the Green Revolution that's so well known in India, and why then was it promoted to Africa?
Right. The Green Revolution was the 1960s and 70s, widely credited with bringing commercially bred seeds to farmers and the fertilizer to make them grow. That technology package, as it was called, came to be known as the Green Revolution. It was named that not because it was so environmentally friendly. In fact, it's proven not to be, but it was named that because it was considered the alternative to red revolutions, peasant revolutions like in Vietnam and China and elsewhere. And United States agricultural development officials wanted to woo peasants away from communism and toward capitalism. And they said, we need to give them something that helps their productivity. This was the package that they offered. And it was widely promoted and heavily promoted in India. Norman Borlaug, a crop breeder from Iowa, was credited with saving millions of lives. He won the Nobel Prize for it. And essentially is given credit for massive productivity increases in food production, rice and wheat, mainly in India. It was considered, historians have revisited some of those claims, and actually I document in the book and in this report that they've significantly revised downward the impacts of those inputs. But the basic idea was that improved help productivity in Asia and parts of Latin America, but it bypassed Africa for a number of reasons. And so the Gates Foundation decided that Africa needed its own green revolution, using improved technologies of crop breeding for Africa's particular agricultural ecosystems. And so the Gates Foundation put up a bunch of money to give Africa its own green revolution in 2006, set those ambitious goals. And there have been almost no accountability for how well that's worked, which is why we did our study.
Before we get on to the study, I mean, just let me just focus on the India one. I mean, was that based on the use of commercial seeds, which are owned by corporations, use of fertilizers, pesticides, and so on? In other words, environmentally pretty serious, but also taking away self-determination from peasant farmers.
That's right, and it actually has proven in retrospect over time to have been an environmental disaster in a number of the Punjab is the case in point. Depleted water supplies, poisoned water supplies, pest resistance, so huge weed and infestation problems as all of these crops start failing to respond to the inputs that they're promoting, and the result for farmers, as you say, the self-determination issue is critical. They find themselves on what people call a technology treadmill, where you basically have to buy these inputs every year to prevent crop failure. And then when you get a crop failure, you're in debt because you've had to buy all these fertilizers and pesticides and seeds. You can't pay your debts, and the farm goes into crisis, the family goes into crisis, and that's where you've seen these reports of rising levels of farmer suicides, is from the debt associated with that technology package. Africa has not made that conversion wholesale as a continent to this industrialized agriculture model, and that's why I think this moment is right to look at how well this is working for Africa. Is it because Africa has a choice to make? Africa can make a different choice now and go on a different path.
So I mean, the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, well, it sought to double crop productivity and incomes and halving insecurity by 2020. Your report talks about that these ambitious goals have never actually been assessed, whether that since 2016 there's anything, 2006, whether there's anything that tells us that it's a success or otherwise. I mean, the money that's been flowing in is astronomical. We're talking about what, $1 billion in funding from 2/3 of which is from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they've given out grants and so it's huge money. And if I'm right, it's also directly associated with the giant agribusiness, what was Monsanto and Bayer now, and other corporations. Is that what is happening in Africa?
Indeed, that's exactly what's happening in Africa. I mean, the amount of money, I've been shocked over the years as I started researching my book and looking at Southern Africa in particular. I was just shocked that so much money could be spent with so little accountability. The Gates Foundation has put more than $600 million into AGRA, into the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. AGRA has spent, like you said, $1 billion in its 14 years, and given out about more than $500,000 in $500 million in grants in the 13 countries it is focused on. And yet there is no no serious accountability for the effectiveness of that aid. No reports that really cite how many farmers are being reached, what the impact is on those farmers in terms of productivity and incomes, and whether food security is improving. I asked AGRA to collaborate in this research by providing data, and they originally said yes, and then fell silent and refused to provide data. I agree with you. It's entirely shocking that there would be so little accountability for so much money, and not just international donor money. What's particularly important for everyone to realize is that African governments are mainly the ones subsidizing this process, because at 10 of the 13 countries that are in the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa have subsidy programs that pay farmers to buy these commercial seeds and fertilizers. They're spending about $1 billion a year collectively to subsidize these purchases. And as you say, it's hard to find winners among farmers from these policies. It's not hard to find winners among multinational agribusiness firms. They are essentially having a market created for them for the purchase of their products that would not have existed because farmers couldn't afford it and wouldn't want to buy these without these subsidies.
So what did you find in your research?
We found that, without data on the actual beneficiaries of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, we just asked the question, are there signs that a green revolution, in terms of the goals that AGRA has set, that a green revolution is coming to Africa? And we found that no, there aren't. There is not a productivity revolution going on in these countries. In fact, yield growth, even in the preferred crop, maize, which is heavily promoted by AGRA and by these input subsidy programs, in 12 years, they've gotten 29% increase in yields. That's about 2% a year. That is not a revolution. That is fairly slow growth, even below population growth. So you're not even outpacing population growth. And the goal, remember, was to double productivity, 100% increase. Incomes have not gone up significantly. Poverty rates remain high. Rural poverty is high. And we looked at food security because the data was the best on food security. And national level food security, the number of undernourished people in agri-countries in this 12-year period we studied has gone up 31%.
Wow.
30 million more people in suffering from malnutrition than there were before. So this is a failure on every level.
So, they talked about these huge increases, 100% increase in productivity and income and so on. But over what period were they saying that?
They said that from 2006 to 2020, they would produce a 100% increase. We had data through 2018, so 2 more years, but basically time's up, and there's no evidence that even any individual agri-country will achieve that kind of productivity growth.
So is it the failure of AGRA that causes them not to publish their data or make it available, or what is it?
Well, if I had the answer to that question, I would certainly report it. I can only suspect that they declined to cooperate with us with our research because they don't want to respond to that. They don't have results they can show that they're proud of. It's interesting that on all of their own reports, the only things that they report on, they never report on the total number of small-scale farmers reached and the impact on those farmers. You get anecdotes, but you don't get data. And what they report on is how many agro dealer networks they set up in different countries to sell these products. They report on how many farmers have attended trainings that they've held. But again, from an impact assessment perspective, that's not evaluating your impact. That's just saying what you do, not whether it's having an effect. And the results are actually speak for themselves, and they're not difficult to explain. Again, I've called, based on the earlier Green Revolution experience in India, I call these the failed policies of the past that they're trying to promote as the future for Africa, the innovative future for Africa. But there's nothing particularly innovative about it, and they've been proven to fail before. So they're failing now. They fail now because farmers cannot afford these inputs. The inputs do not produce dramatic enough yield improvements to actually increase sales and incomes that would allow farmers to keep buying more inputs and improve their lives. Country after country shows that to be true. There's nothing surprising about that. And yet the money just keeps getting plowed in year after year by African governments, the Gates Foundation, and donor governments like USAID.
So, I mean, you can understand the corporations and the Gates Foundation loving this, as does the US government. But what's in it for the African governments?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think that is the real challenge that our report poses to African governments, because they're spending, a country like Malawi in any given year will spend 30 to 50% of its agricultural budget on these input subsidies.
Wow.
No, I mean, their countries are spending huge sums out of their own budgets. And I think these results are saying that is a very bad use of scarce government money. You could, and the alternatives, which we document in the report, are essentially low input ecological agriculture, which does not cost a lot of money. That's the point. It doesn't cost farmers a lot of money, which is why they're willing to adopt such practices. And it doesn't cost governments much money because it's mainly about training and facilitation and improving access to organic inputs, like small animals on the farm that can produce manure. Obviously, there's no multinational firm that's making a lot of money off of the provision of goats and the like to help provide fertilizer for farmers' crops.
But aren't small farmers the people who actually feed us? I mean, internationally, it seems to me that if I recall the data, something like 70+% of food actually is produced by small-scale farms, not by the great industrial production.
That's right, and more importantly, in poor countries, in agricultural countries, like many in Africa. That number can be as high as 80%, and a lot of those are informal markets, local regional markets. These are not farmers who are all connected to global supply chains. And one of the dangers that we point to in the report is that it's really a question of path dependence and what path Africa chooses to take. And the COVID crisis has highlighted just how fragile some of those global supply chains are. If you're dependent on imported seeds and fertilizers to make your crop grow, you were in really bad shape this last spring. And that's a vulnerability that farmers don't need more of, they need less of. They need more resilient systems that are locally based, shorter supply chains, lower cost inputs, and regional markets where they can sell their products, not necessarily plugging them into global supply chains that can be easily disrupted.
So has AGRA reacted to your report?
a journalist just published something this morning that published the first formal response I've seen. I guess the organizations that funded the research and published not my background paper, which is the basis for the report, but the actual policy report. False promises. It was a coalition of German governments hoping to push the German government to pull out of AGRA. They got a journalist got a short statement from AGRA. I just saw it this morning for the first time.
Oh.
And it basically says, these researchers are biased. They call me out by name as making, here I have it in front of me. They say, Mr. Wise has a history of writing unfounded allegations and uncorroborated reports about AGRA and its work. Obviously, that's not a response. And hopefully a journalist will follow up with them and say, well, so show us your results. I mean, show us that the findings in this report are wrong, instead of just offering slander about what the biases of the researchers.
It's a classic technique.
For sure.
Yeah. But to what extent do you think they'll use the COVID crisis to say, well, it would have gone well, but given the impact of COVID and so on, we can hardly be blamed for not being able to reach our goals?
Well, for sure. I mean, they'll use anything they can. I mean, our data only goes up through 2018, so it doesn't include COVID. No doubt a lot of these figures, when they include 2020, will be far worse. But in fact, actually, the other related response is well, climate change is heavily impacting farmers. There've been droughts in southern Africa. Of course, yields have been lower. But the response to that is actually right. And the Green Revolution package is not good for climate change for farmers. It doesn't help them become more resilient. They become more dependent on just one crop, maize, the one that's supported and backed. They lose their crop diversity. Crop diversity is the insurance package for small-scale farmers in a COVID crisis and in a climate crisis. If one crop fails to drought, other crops survive. They have something to eat. Soil fertility is resilience to climate change, and soil fertility actually goes down with the use of with the persistent use over time of these inputs. So the idea that the crises of our times make it impossible to make any progress. My response to that is the crises of our times, COVID, climate, make it all the more important to make sure that any system that's getting promoted is going to help farmers be resilient to that.
Well, indeed. I mean, we've had people discuss the impact of commercial farming and livestock production, which is associated with large-scale deforestation, which is, many believe, the source of all these multitude of zoonotic viruses that are developing and which will develop in the coming period unless those are stopped. So I think your point is absolutely right. It's the system itself that is destroying the capacity of farmers to actually produce.
Yeah, I mean, even more. It's even more striking that that many of these same arguments are made that that farmers need these inputs to survive the COVID crisis and to have affordable and nutritious diets, but undermining farmers' crop diversity is not a way to promote nutritional diversity. I mean, one of the most, let me highlight two of the really striking findings to me that surprised me a little bit. in this research. One was that all the emphasis and support and subsidies going to maize have truly undermined traditional, nutritious, climate resilient crops like millet and sorghum. You get millet which is far more nutritious than corn and a staple in a number of countries. And you see the land planted to millet go down as it gets shifted into maize. Yields have actually declined 21% in this same period when maize yields have been increasing because it's getting all the support. So declining crop diversity is a terrible outcome for nutritional diversity. And the second that surprised me is that all those subsidies going into corn have encouraged land to be planted in corn. And that means that not only is land being taken out of millet production and the production of other staple foods, but it's also encouraging farmers to plant on unplanted land, which some countries have unplanted land to plant on, others do not. And so it encourages production on marginal lands, which of a commodity crop like maize, which has very significant climate change implications. The goal of these programs is to encourage so-called sustainable intensification, meaning getting more out of the existing land that's already under cultivation, not encouraging the production on new lands, the expansion to new lands, which has, like you said, in the worst case, it promotes deforestation for agricultural uses, and that has tremendous climate change implications. So it's just striking that there has been production increases of maize, but they've come mainly from expanding the land planted in maize, not from productivity increases. Just the opposite of what the promoters of those policies say they're trying to do.
I mean, as I understand, this particular piece of research emerges out of the work that you did on this amazing book, Eating Tomorrow: Agribusiness, Family Farmers, and the Battle for the Future of Food. To what extent are the stories that you've described happening in Africa are something that's happening on a much wider scale?
Oh, it's a very generalized phenomenon. It obviously expresses itself in very different ways in different places. For the book, I went to Iowa. I went to the Midwest of the U.S. to look at where this industrial model started and how it's working for Iowa, and found it's not working well at all for Iowa. Environmental destruction, hollowing out of farming communities, farmers barely getting by, even in Iowa, and the companies just getting richer and richer. But I looked at India. I looked at Mexico in detail, a country that I've done a lot of research in over the years. And this is a generalized phenomenon. I mean, I think the most dramatic, the most sort of the clearest and simplest way I summarize what I found in the book is that we are, as a world, struggling to ensure that everyone can eat today, and we're not doing such a good job of that. Eating tomorrow becomes much more difficult with climate change looming, and actually already having a significant impact on farmers. But the way that we're producing our food, and the way that the powers that be, the Gates Foundation and others, are saying we should produce our food on chemical-intensive industrial-scale farms, is quite literally undermining the natural resource base on which future food production depends: the soil, the seeds, the climate, the water table. All of that is negatively impacted and undermining our ability to feed ourselves in the future. And so it's just the wrong path. And the question I ask is why, if those policies are so badly suited to our situation, why do governments keep supporting them instead of listening to their small-scale farmers and supporting their low-input systems, which are showing much better results?
Well, some would say that as a result of the sort of spread of neoliberal capitalism, our governments are more accountable to the financial houses, to international corporations, the transnational corporations, than they are to the people who elected them. What's your view on that?
No, it's very true, and I mean, in the case of the United States, and people don't realize that agribusiness spends more money lobbying in Washington than the defense industry does.
Good grief.
Millions and millions of dollars a year, and that's just in Congress. At a state level, in a state like Iowa, their resources completely overwhelm state governments in terms of political power. Take that to a country like Malawi. Monsanto alone has revenues larger than Malawi's entire gross domestic product. So the asymmetries in kind of bargaining power, Malawi and a lot of other poor countries are quite desperate for foreign investment, so they are kind of ready to take whatever offer they can get. And these companies come in. One of the things I found in the book was that a former country director of Monsanto Malawi had actually co-authored the first draft of the national seed policy, which would have made it illegal for farmers to save, exchange, and sell their seeds.
Wow.
I mean, farmers beat that back in the end so that it wasn't so draconian, but the first draft was co-authored by a Monsanto executive.
Good gracious me.
So they're not just lobbying for policies, they're writing them. But in the United States, we should know that already, because the so-called revolving door has people going back and forth between government lobby and writing policies right in the process, right in the legislative process.
Well, I mean, that brings us to this whole issue of farmers are not passive; they're also organized. And certainly a few years ago, we worked a lot with a group in West Africa called We Are the Solution, which was set up precisely as an alternative to AGRA. That rather than saying we're against AGRA, they were saying, no, we are the solution. These were peasant organizations saying we are the solution. Have you seen this kind of thing developing across Africa as you were doing your research?
Everywhere I went, I've seen that. I mean, that was the most encouraging thing about the research that I did and the findings that I came up with. I mean, I'm not kidding when I said, why aren't policymakers listening to the farmers around them who are offering low cost and more effective solutions to problems? I saw it everywhere. Amazing projects in Malawi and Mozambique, and dramatic resistance actually to some of these policies. I just got the news this week actually that what was meant to be one of the things I cover in the book is land grabbing, where governments are handing out, kind of essentially giving away huge tracts of land to foreign companies to come in and supposedly bring industrial scale agriculture to a place like Mozambique in southern Africa. And the largest, what was set out to be the largest land grab in Africa, the Pro Savannah project in Mozambique, has just formally been shut down by the governments that were supporting it, because peasant resistance was so strong that they could not move ahead with the project. An amazing victory on the one hand, and what farmers there will tell you is, yeah, but we still don't have any land for ourselves and support to farm it in a good way. That remains as the struggle to that I think is a unified demand across a lot of the countries that I researched.
I mean, Pro Savannah was an initiative that involved also the Brazilian and Japanese governments.
Right.
And that sort of raises the other question. I mean, especially in the US, one hears not so much of the voracious work of the transnational corporations, but instead that everything is blamed on China. To what extent is China involved in large-scale land grabbing and transformation of smallholder farmers in the same way that the Monsantos of the world have done?
Yeah, it is one of the great myths that came out of the early wave of land grabbing in 2008. You have to remember that commodity prices spiked, went way up. Financial speculation was rampant. And as the stock markets crashed, financial capital had nowhere to go, and they decided that land was the asset to go after. So there was a rush into buying up land, and a lot got blamed on China. When the researchers finally started looking at the data, it actually showed that the two largest source countries for land grab capital were the U.S. and the U.K. China was, I think, 11th on the list. That's evolved over time, but China is very actively involved. And in the book, I document one of a land grab that a Chinese parastatal organization was involved in. That also failed. Farmers beat it back, and it failed on its own terms. And now a new farmers association there has petitioned for 500 acres of land for their farmers association to grow their own crops and do it ecologically. So again, that's progress, but it was daunting to see what these farmers had to go up against just to defend what little they had from being taken away from them.
Yeah. Well, apart from encouraging people to read your book, any particular final message you feel people need to be reflecting on and thinking about?
Yeah, I mean the real message of this report and of the book as well, but the report specifically about the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa and the Green Revolution model, excuse me, is that it's failing. That these are the failing models of the failing approaches of the past, and it's time to change course. Everyone recognizes, international bodies from the UN Climate Commission on down have recognized that business as usual isn't an option. We don't need to be doing more of the same because it's not working. It's not reducing hunger. It's not reducing poverty. It's not promoting sustainable development compatible with the challenges of climate change. Time to change course, and I think this report signals ways that African governments really need to shift course, ways that donor governments for aid policies, donor governments like the United States, need to reevaluate their priorities, and ways that philanthrocapitalists like the Gates Foundation need to provide some real accountability for what they're doing. If they think that what they're doing is actually working, then they need to provide data. They have been so closed to any kind of accountability. I mean, people forget the Gates Foundation is the largest private foundation in the world. It has a board of directors of 3 people: Bill, Melinda, and Warren Buffett. That's who it's accountable to. It's not accountable to even a larger board of directors. So those millions and millions of dollars have very little demands placed on them, and they throw their weight around in the world. So there needs to be accountability for that.
So, if people wanted to, I'm showing here the article that you wrote on the Institute of Agriculture and Trade Policy website. But if people wanted to get hold of a copy of your report, where would they go?
That has a link to the report. It was published by the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung Foundation, and it's available in right now German and English with a French version in process. I just did a policy brief that summarizes some of the results that with the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. That is out in French and English, and there will be more material on this coming out as it was just released in July 10th. The report was, so there'll be more material coming out to try to highlight some of the policy changes that are needed.
Well, I will make sure that there's a link on our website to the reports in different languages. But I'd like to congratulate you on taking on AGRA. I mean, you're dealing with the big ones who are not going to be kind to you. We know that already. But it has been a long time coming that a serious confrontation with AGRA is developed, both on the ground and in important reports such as you produced. So I would really like to thank you for having done that, and my colleagues at IATP also for encouraging them to.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, and the credit really goes to as well to the producers of this report, which is a coalition of German and African NGOs and the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung Foundation, which funded it, which saw the value in trying to bring some accountability for these policies, both to the German government, which is a donor to AGRA, and African governments, which are providing so much money in input subsidies that really need to be looked at.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Tim, for joining us on the show and helping us understand the nature of AGRA and the situation faced by smallholders, both in Africa and internationally. So thank you for giving time to us.
It was really my pleasure. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Be sure we will be back on your tails very soon, as soon as new reports come out. So thank you very much indeed. And I hope we will see you in the near future.
Great. Thanks, Russ.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. That was Tim Wise, author of Eating Tomorrow, Agribusiness, Family Farmers and the Battle for the Future of Food, published by the New Press, February 2019. Thank you for joining us on this show. And tomorrow we'll be going over to the Niger Delta in Nigeria, an environment that has suffered hugely in environmental destruction by Shell and other oil companies. And we'll be talking to an activist there. So I hope you'll join us tomorrow, and thank you for joining us today on. I'm trying to get oh dear, trying to get things going. Here we are. Okay, so goodbye for now, and I look forward to speaking with you tomorrow.
They don't go to work, they don't get food. They don't go to work, they don't get food. They don't go to work.